Hello, everyone, and welcome to the accidentally named Free Thought Blog's Podish-Sortacast, in which people who are mostly used to writing attempt live talking instead. Today, we're talking about climate change, also known as global warming, or as I like to call it, the capitalist apocalypse. We've got today, myself, I'm Abby St. Brendan from Impossible Me. We've got H.J. Hornbeck from Reprobate Spreadsheet, and probably my favorite named blog of all time, The Great American Satan. And I believe the aforementioned Great Lord of Darkness from America had a few words to start us off.
Yeah, so something we're notably lacking in today is a expert in climate science or environmentalism generally. But I think that there's a lot of enough discourse out there right now that really is revolving about the issues of what regular people should do that are not experts. And I think that that's kind of what we'll focus on today. A really big problem right now, I think, is that a lot of people don't know exactly what to expect, and we're catastrophizing. And that's what I want to lead off with, is kind of a caution against catastrophizing, like thinking of just like, it's definitely going to be the worst case scenario, every man for himself, run for the hills, get your guns kind of thoughts. Because this is what happens. There is a science Reddit that's just supposed to be general science news. Oh, here, cool new squid species found, whatever. They will run an article on climate science from time to time. Reddit being what it is, it tends to accelerate the most extreme reactionary kind of voices to the top of the comments quickly, or at least the most excitable people. So now, I wasn't there for this. Somebody told me about this secondhand, so I may have some of the facts a little out of order. But there was an article recently on climate change, a few weeks back or something like that, might have been about a month now, where they were saying, oh, we've discovered that things are not so great. We're on the higher end of the projections. It's going to get hot. Things are going to suck, right? It was like, but it was very scientific, plain about it. It wasn't saying that, like, anything particularly apocalyptic, except insofar as this is all, has baseline at least somewhat apocalyptic, right? And then the people in the comments freaked out. I mean, really ridiculously overwrought, extreme freak out, to the point where they ultimately had to come back and delete the comments. And it was stuff like, a lot of people were talking about, like, planning, like survivalist stuff, but some people were talking about, like, when should I commit suicide? And at least one person was all like, should I mercy kill my children? So when you're talking about climate change, this is the sort of thing that people are going to start thinking about. I blame The Walking Dead, I blame Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and Oprah Winfrey for promoting it. People got this idea that the climate apocalypse is going to be cannibalism, roving gangs of pirates and all this kind of weird stuff, and they're all like afraid that, like,
not any more than it already is.
Down the road, my children are going to have to, yeah. So it's like, yeah, I mean, the main thing is, like, when we talk about this, we got to try and figure out something that would be really nice is if we could, while yes, there's a lot of this is unpredictable, if we could get some kind of perspective on what exactly the bad stuff is going to look like, so that people can stop picturing, like, babies roasting over an open fire and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Terrible Christmas song, that.
That is basically what I want to say. Let's try not to talk like that ourselves if we can avoid it, and thereby not, provoke anybody in the comments to get even wilder than we are, right?
You raise some pretty good points. I think it's at least fair, therefore, to mention not like the opposite argument so much as a basis for the reasoning. Because it's very difficult to predict for sure what actually is going to happen. There are certain elements of this that, to my knowledge, I don't think this is a catastrophizing thing, but rather something I've read in some of the well-digested for relatively public consumption scientific papers. But things like the trapped methane in the Arctic are things that frankly terrify me. And here's me in Canada, which is arguably one of the best places to be under the circumstances that we're about to deal with. The whole concept never mind going full zombie apocalypse with it, is just so overwhelming to wrap my head around that I find myself in a position where it's like it's the same existential dread of death. Either I don't think about it or it's paralytic. Not sure what to do about that.
And I mean, what further complicates things too is that what can you do about it? This is a policy issue that covers billions of people. Just simply switching out your light bulbs is going to help, sure, but it's not a solution in and of itself. This is a time for political action, and activism along those sides, but you're also contending with, well-known political actors that already have, full control of things. As much, as we talk about being a democracy and, giving power to the people, oil interests and all that do have a disproportionate impact through the amount of money that they spend through, campaigns like this. So I'm trying to cut the middle ground here, which I know golden mean never actually true, but it's important to sort of be cognizant of what we're facing and the doom and gloom which may easily happen, while at the same time finding a way to sort of cause it to spur us to action rather than lead to despair. And there's always going to be a middle line that you're sort of going to walk down with that, but there should be some level of compromise between the two, between forcing yourself to action and just curling up into a ball and giving up.
Very much so. Which brings it back essentially to what I'm going to giggle at this every time I have to say it, to what Satan was saying, which is from a practical, we have some ideas about what the global effects are going to be. And at this point, it's hard to miss what people are saying that's going to happen to some extent on societal levels. There's going to be some famines around the world. There's going to be a lot of refugees, etc. There's going to be horrible storms. But one thing I don't think I've ever seen clearly addressed is what's that going to be on a practical day-to-day experience? Like, there's going to be some horrible events, but between the horrible events, life goes on. What's that going to be when the things that we're trying to take for granted now, we can't? Which are the things that aren't going to be there? I'm hoping Satan has some words about that because I truly don't know.
Yeah, so the power structures that exist are pretty well ensconced. I think it's safe to say that society itself, as we know it, is going to continue. And this is something that a lot of people are really, at least in the so-called first world nations. I don't think, I think a lot of people are just assuming that like it's going to take 2 seconds for the government to disintegrate and then we're in Mad Max. So like on one level, that's not good because the government as it currently exists is basically by billionaires for billionaires and like run by people that are so out of touch with reality that they can watch their countries burning to ashes and like think that they can drag their feet about shit. On another level,
want to break in there for just
order.
A second. Sorry to interrupt. There's something there I think that's worth keeping an eye on, though. You said the government. I suspect you mean the American government, where you are, which is quite reasonable. But this is actually a problem where I think it's a mistake to think of any one country's government as being the government, essentially, especially since, I mean, the rest of us in this chat right now aren't in that country.
That's right. Yeah, we're 2/3 Canadian
Canada
content.
Obviously would be a quote unquote first world nation, right? So when I say like the governments of the so-called first world nations, I'm including Canada in that. Yeah, I mean like places that have less stable governments, more of deprivation, are going to have a much worse political stability than we are here in North America, particularly the north end of North America. I don't think that anyways, I'm just saying that the government stability on one level bad, on one level good. We're not going to see like such a breakdown of order that I think you really need to worry about like the roving bands of pirates and stuff like that. The cannibal guys keeping people in their basement to chop off pieces of meat for like on an as needed basis, like in Cormac McCarthy's book. No, I mean, yeah, there's food shortages, but there's rats. I mean, we could eat rats, squirrels, crows. There's wild turkeys running through Mano Singham's neighborhood. I mean, like, there's food everywhere. It's like deprivation, like is in some places it's real, it's legit, but in other places it's like it's an illusion created by capitalism. Like, we have recourse. We're not going to jump straight to like apocalyptic circumstances. I mean, it's terrible. There's a lot of horrible things that are going to happen. I'm really mad about it. I'm fairly despairing about it. But I think that that the idea that it's going to immediately come to Mad Max is kind of dangerously skewed, and will promote people to acting badly.
A moment of levity in there. You mentioned wild turkeys in Dr. Singham's area, and I just added the assumption so he can get them for you. It's like, yes, everybody needs a retired physicist to go get their wild turkeys for them.
Indeed. All right. Don't know if you spotted, but we do actually have a question in the chat asking about how much impact COVID shutdowns had. Now, again, we're all non-experts here, so a bit of a guess. I do remember hearing studies that it actually did play a significant role. Certainly get rid of a lot of air travel. And I remember that a lot of air quality indexes will improve. This is something that was shown after 9/11. Still true today, I'm quite sure. Generally speaking, if our economic output is actually tied, our economic output and our carbon footprint are uniquely tied. So if you decrease the amount of economic activity, you're also going to decrease the footprint. I believe there are studies that have shown this. Again, I'm sort of going directly from memory, so grain of salt. But yes, I definitely think it did have an impact. Now, obviously not sustainable, but with this demonstration that we can actually run large sections of our populace essentially from home via Zoom meetings and all that, there's a chance of us actually sort of cutting things further. Telecommuting has great potential to reduce our carbon footprint even further, and hopefully this is something that'll actually stick within society and make a positive impact.
Yes, well, I mean, a lot of that actually is sustainable, at least as far as any of the employment that can be done via telecommuting. And one of the funny things, if we're going to dig hard enough to find something redeeming and hilarious in the pandemic, it's that for a lot of us who might have work in technology or really accounting, anything that can be telecommuted, traditionally we have our bosses saying you can't telecommute because the work won't get done. Now all of that argument has been destroyed, and with it the observation that commuting itself seems to be bad for the quality of life of the employees and en masse for carbon footprints. Like there's now an economic and environmental argument has now been generated for not forcing people to go into the office all the time. I'm aware, of course, that this is a very bougie argument and only applies to relatively privileged white-collar jobs.
But yeah, I think we're kind of overrepresented there, but
unfortunately, to some extent, that is unavoidable. Because of the nature of what we are, the free thought blogs, is blogging is a thing that is done online by comparatively tech-savvy people with comparative amounts of time and access to the internet to do it. That's going to tend to somewhat select for whiter collars, I think. Yeah, we're certainly the blog network at large is certainly heavily overrepresented in professors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A not insignificant portion of the time I've been on free thought blogs, I was unemployed for a bit. I was working at Walmart for most of the time, and I've been working in a call center for the last couple of years. That call center has gone virtual, so I've been fortunate to be telecommuting for a while now. a little over a year and a half. But my life has been like really low to the ground, fast food jobs, periods of unemployment, living in people's attics or basements for like $200 a month rent. I've got some perspective on that sort of thing. And I see a question popped in on the chat. What about feeding everyone? Yeah, that's going to be the one thing I kept coming back to in terms of the so-called the apocalyptic scenario people fear. Yeah, we've particularly in the first world, Abe Drayton, Oceanoxia blogger, who I would be lovely to have here today, but apparently could not be available for it. Has a post up today about how the rich nations take from poor nations, and we've extracted so many resources from developing nations that we have just massive amounts of extra resources right now. You know, food spoils. Those stockpiles can only go so far, but like we just are so well off with regards to food. I mean, like the scarcity that we see for people, like people that have food insecurity right now, it's because they can't steal, because hunting rats and pigeons is frowned upon. Pigeons are a great food source that we have in abundance. That stuff is going to be available before we get absolutely down to the wire, and we aren't even close to touching those food resources yet. We've still got grain silos, we've still got canned goods, we've got so much, and it's just a matter of saying like, hey, we get desperate enough, that stuff doesn't cost anything. The store gets flipped, the warehouse gets opened. And people aren't going to be hoarding it either. To some extent, there may be some hoarding, right? But people care about people. People have friends, relatives, neighbors that they care about. They're going to give other people food. I don't think anybody's going to be like the true desperation, the what people are imagining. That is where we're going to be looking at. That's going to be like people in the global south and the so-called developing nations or third world nations. Those people are going to be hit the worst. People for people that are on Reddit to be panicking of like, we're going to should I be mercy killing my children? That is the kind of thing that I think is just completely ludicrous, over the top. I mean, yeah, we're going to have to deal with some privation we've never dealt with before, but the idea that we personally are going to starve is silly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, again, another thing I'd like to bring up as well is insects too. There's been repeated calls over the past decades or two to look into insects as a food source. And in a lot of countries, they actually are dependent on it. It's just we haven't really sort of looked into it in North America due to reasons of, historic accident. We haven't sort of developed a tradition of it. We haven't developed, a tolerance of, accepting people who do eat insects. And we sort of need to break down those barriers and get things going. And a lot of food security sort of does come down to a redistribution option. I've seen multiple things sort of point out that we actually have enough food for everyone. The problem is, of course, getting it to the people who need it and preventing the spoils, from going to place. This is a logistics problem, not necessarily something that's insolvable. It's important to sort of keep the sort of climate gloom of, okay, we've locked in, any warming that we're going to get for the next 50 years or so, from, we need to rethink our resupply line, the way we actually supply food to one another. Those are both fairly massive things, but one is a little bit more fungible since it was sort of invented by human beings and can be much easier controlled by human beings, more or less on a dime. So I think we can sort out food. It's just a matter of will.
Maybe not. I mean, PZ's in the comments there saying things, and he just said something that I was thinking while you were saying that. We're in the midst of an insect apocalypse. Everything you said about we should be looking to insects for a secondary food source, it'd be a great idea if we not killed them first.
Also true, yes. Mass die-offs tend to be inconvenient for that sort of thing.
Mass die-offs are also mass blooms in frequent cases of other life forms. You see the ocean, like we could see all of the fish that we depend upon go extinct, right? Because of acidification, what do they call it, anoxic zones, and so on. What's going to replace that? Something will replace that. Probably algae, a lot of it poisonous, but we could potentially manage edible algae and have a ludicrously gigantic food source off of that. Soylent
Just
Green,
because stuff is poisonous, that does not traditionally stop
algae-based food as the but yeah, like that was the lie in Soylent Green, was that like, oh, Soylent Green's made from algae, but it was actually made from people. But still, I mean, like, theoretically, apocalyptic future, all our traditional food sources are gone. Algae is incredibly good at growing on just the pitiful resources, and we could just be like 100% algae and, you know, vitamins we pulled out of rocks and weeds. It's like we're nowhere near that at this point. But, you know, the idea that starvation is going to be the biggest risk, the only reason starvation's a risk now is because of capitalism, and we can change that. Somebody had a question about what counts as apocalyptic. Is 700,000 dead of COVID an example? What do you think?
Well, yes, actually. That pretty much is apocalyptic. Certainly it is cause for concern. We should do everything we can to mitigate it. Yeah, that's apocalyptic. And there's no way we can kind of get through climate change without numbers in those sorts of realms. Although it's tough to tell exactly. We're talking, you know, you're basically asking us to predict what's going to happen, you know, hundreds, even 200s of years in the future. It's really tough. You know, 100 years ago, would you be able to predict that we had the technologies we have now? No. That's not a call for techno-utopianism to sort of rely on technologies to fix us. It's a good guess people will die due to climate change, if only because people are already dying from climate change right now. The numbers are going to be bad, but it's an apocalypse, but it's an apocalypse we're kind of going to have to power through to some extent.
See, I actually disagree. Although this is probably going to sound horrible, I don't think 700,000 dead in the States is apocalyptic. I think it is a disgusting tragedy and massive mishandling by various governments, but I tend to think that something to be apocalyptic, you have to get a significant percentage of the population snuffed. Like the Black Plague that killed like a third of Europe, that's apocalyptic. 700,000 is a monstrous tragedy. It's also less than 1/3 of the population of the States. That's not an argument to not do anything about it. Jesus. But it's not an apocalypse yet. It's working on it. Some of the politicians in the States seem to want to make sure it's going to be a proper apocalypse, but not yet. Wave it off. I don't want to wave it off. No.
No waving.
Now,
no waving.
I don't think I agree that 700,000, like, statistically speaking, not apocalyptic. It is can be read as a portent, because if COVID could do this, something could come along that could do worse. So yeah, and even with the way the resources are, it looks apocalyptic some places. You've got like town in Texas where like crematorium ash is like choking people in the streets, and like they've got big trailers full of bodies waiting to get processed, and hot people being turned away from or dying in hospitals waiting for treatment because we don't have because capitalist medicine hasn't given us the resources to handle a crisis like this. So it's situationally apocalyptic, but globally speaking, in the United States, no, not apocalyptic. That said, I think we could see some stuff that puts that to shame as early as next year. And I'm talking about heat waves, killer heat waves. Canada, you've had some recent experience with this. I believe there was a small Canadian town that this last summer was completely disintegrated by fire.
Yeah, that was pretty close.
People basically had time to hop in their cars, and that was close to where you live. I'm really sorry.
Well, not that close. It was in the interior. I'm in Vancouver. It was in the interior of BC.
We're talking Canadian close here.
Canadian close.
Yeah, but that's there was also somewhat close to me.
Now that was part of a heat wave in the Pacific Northwest, the region I live in, that has that killed a few thousand people, or at the very least hundreds. I forget how many exactly, and was shattered records, like blasted way over records, repeatedly. Now, let's say that happened in a place that's already hotter, more humid, more densely populated, or Bangladesh. We could see numbers of dead people and refugees, and just like horror, like an absolute horror show, just unspeakable devastation. Welcome to the Holocaust Part 2, except somewhere else, and it's the hand of God, or capitalism, if you will, coming down on us. It's and that could happen next year. We could see over 1 million dead within a few weeks, within the span of a few weeks. So we have to do something about that. Particularly the governments in those parts of the world really need to figure out how to do something about that. And we're not going to be able to do that with climate defeatism. We got to think about what's possible to happen and do something about it. And as long as we're not just throwing our hands up, that's possible still.
It is, but the inertia is intense. What are we supposed to do as private citizens with no particular fingers on the levers of power to move the people who do have their fingers on the levers of power, who are invested literally in not doing anything, because it gives them that money stuff that isn't going to mean anything when everyone's dead?
Well, to some extent, slow collective action. Being a resident of Alberta, I've heard a lot of pro-pipeline propaganda from my government, and a lot of big business interests in here too. But one interesting conspiracy that has been circulated by our government is that these shadowy international cabals have been sort of working to discredit, to remove sort of funding for petroleum projects. And if you get rid of the whole conspiracy, shadowy, cabal kind of things, it's kind of true in a way. There actually has been a big push to divest from fossil fuels. Major schools, some major schools, like I think Harvard, for instance, have actually, shifted their monetary, their pensions and all that away from fossil fuel sources. And there's a gradual movement away from that. There's a recognition that we need to get off of fossil fuels, and ever so slowly, people are sort of gradually, moving their money away from those things. And this extends all the way from the obvious of, we're not going to, speculate on, oil sands or anything like that and dump money onto it, but also to the more subtle, pensions and all that, which, invest in funds are less likely to do, oil speculation because of those reasons. And it's notable, in fact, that gasoline prices have gone up quite a bit here within Alberta. And that's usually a good sign for the oil sands that we have here, since it's so nasty and inefficient to extract. It requires high oil prices just to actually break even. But I don't see any sort of cheering of that and saying, woohoo, the good times are back. There's a level of recognition that the good times are never coming back in here, despite what the government says. We as a globe are gradually moving away from oil. That is a slow, steady, progressive thing. Certainly much slower than it should be, perhaps, but it's going. And if we go to defeatism, we sort of get that there's a little bit of that nuance. We can again debate how much movement it is, but this movement is happening, and it's happening because people like us who run a blog and don't have any expertise are still sort of pounding the issue and trying to raise awareness on it. The small actions do have an impact. It's just a very small impact.
I always remember I was looking at my stats one time, and I saw that somebody from the Department of the Interior had visited my blog, which I thought was funny. I don't think if I was in the government, I would be using my computer to visit blogs. But yeah, anyways, like you never know who's going to overhear your conversation and have that put a bug in their ear. So it's like continuing to have the conversations itself is very useful. It isn't just about the petroleum fuels at this point. We've got the like Abby mentioned, the methane being released from permafrost, albedo going down, like feedback of loops are in place now to where if we stopped all petroleum use instantly, we're still going to be facing some fairly apocalyptic and unpleasant events here in the very near future. As I was thinking about like, what if that heat wave that hit the Northwest hit somewhere like more vulnerable? I was thinking about, yeah, I mean, we can stop petroleum tomorrow, theoretically. Of course we can't, but like we'll do our best. But even if we do that, they need to make air conditioning completely universal in like huge tracts of the world. And that's down to the governments of those parts of the world. And it's not like we're going to be able to, influence the government of Bangladesh from free thought blogs. But I would say good luck to everybody who's doing the activist work there, because there surely are people doing activist work there as well. Rural India particularly is going to need just like so much air conditioning. Like right now, they've got like a campaign in place. I've heard that where they prevent people from starving to death or reduce the rate of people starving to death by basically having like a bare minimum amount of rice they give to people in the most deprived parts of India, right? Well, a little bit of rice. Okay, that's great. Now we need to also have like buildings where like, warehouse sized building full of air conditioning, underground places where people can hang out or whatever with air conditioning, where we can stash people for 2, 3, 4 weeks with a food supply and water supply if we have to. That's something we're going to need here. And we need to have that like yesterday, just because that's going to happen to that part of the world at some point. And yeah, we got to be hitting this from every angle whenever we can.
Those things are going to require a great deal of energy. The commenter there asking whether, what about nuclear power? And at least from my point of view, I think nuclear is a good idea. I'm not convinced entirely about nuclear fission being a great long-term solution, but at least in the shorter medium term, that's a reasonably solved technology that does work and is capable of providing a good deal of energy in ways that don't exacerbate the specific environmental problems that are the big ones right now.
Yeah.
Another question there about air conditioning. I would also say yes to nuclear energy within reason. Obviously, we got to be careful about how we do it. But the nuclear disasters that have happened so far, none of them have been like world ruining. We could get a lot of energy out of it without it being a complete lost cause if something does go wrong. So nuclear, sure, as long as it's done well. Is air conditioning a huge energy consumer? Yes, absolutely it is, but we still need it. Yeah. In fact, people die without that. I'm sorry, it's just where it is now. It could be made more efficient if it was like integrated with buildings. I've seen pictures of like tenement buildings in Hong Kong with air conditioners in almost every window, presumably every window that has a person living within the unit. Well, what if they didn't need an air conditioner in every single unit because it was integrated with the structure? It would be a lot more energy efficient. So we need changes, but air conditioning is going to have to be part of it. Or we can just like write off big tracts of the planet, which are going to become unsurvivable without it.
Yeah, the alternative to not doing these sort of retrofitting of existing buildings is basically mass migrations. I mean, with a fair chunk of the eastern part of the United States potentially becoming uninhabitable in the next couple of decades, given the choices, if we want to avoid an apocalypse, we kind of have to do with these, large-scale changes involving air conditioning and things. It's again sort of the careful logistics that you sort of need to manage a problem on this scale, made more complicated by the fact that there's no one person in charge. But yeah, you kind of have to pick your.
I mean, the whole thing is it. Are we saying that we shouldn't use air conditioning? No, I mean, here's the fact. People are going to die from heat unless we can cool them down. The available technologies to do a cooling are pretty limited, and most of the ones we found to be effective require a great deal of energy.
Mhm.
It seems like an unavoidable situation that therefore we have to find the electricity for it.
Without one person in charge, like Hornbeck said, that reminds me of something. What about eco-fascism? As a political blog, this is something we should be able to address, or at least chime in with some opinions about. Eco-fascism is becoming very appealing to people. It's the idea that you need like some kind of strong authority to in order to avert disaster, to manage the climate change disaster as it unfolds. Particularly, there's a lot of ideas associated with that, like reducing the population of undesirables and such. I don't know what to think about that in some ways.
Well, I mean, it's a nonsense ideology.
As free thought blogs, I should probably say something about it.
I mean, if you want to think something about it, it's a nonsense ideology. It is really, it's basically the ideology of somebody who has accepted that the climate change is a huge issue that needs to be dealt with. But in the meantime, man, they like their capitalism and their current patriarchy system so much. Not realizing that, frankly, almost all of these problems can be traced back to behaviors that are the direct result of the colonialism that produced the people who are inclined to be eco-fascists. You don't find those particular, you don't really find eco-fascist type sentiments, very rarely at least, amongst the kinds of cultures that weren't based on colonialism, that don't trace their immediate ancestry back to the British Empire.
Very true. I kind of think of it as a sort of murder-suicide pact. Does it solve some problems? Sure, but it's not the right thing to do. Come on, it's no. Do not engage in ecofascism. Do not endorse ecofascism. Do not think that fellow people deserve to be murdered, especially since it's very difficult to actually trace who is responsible for some of these things to some extent. Obviously, we can lay quite a bit of blame at the feet of the heads of petro companies who have not properly tried to diversify their businesses to help do things. Potentially large scale transport and all that. But oftentimes, ecofascism isn't really sort of directed against the people who are the true harms of it. It's mostly the little people, the poor and disaffected, who have very little power, that would actually wind up,
and
dead.
Very little carbon footprint too.
Exactly. It's trying to solve the problem in a completely backward way, and one that essentially betrays our principles as well too. It should not be entertained by anyone, and I am incredibly disappointed whenever I see it come up.
So on that note, why don't we take a moment now? William Brinkman from the Bolingbroke Babbler sent in a pre-recorded segment to play for us as part of this chat today. And I think now is probably a good time to include that. You can happily take that away, HJ.
Hey, this is William Brinkman, the creator of the Bolingbroke Babbler blog. Sorry I can't make the live recording. I'm working on my new novel, The Rift. Hopefully out later this year or January of next year. But I did want to contribute my thoughts on this week's topic, global warming. First of all, in terms of what secularism can offer in the fight against global warming, it can, not necessarily will, but it can allow us to look at it as from a scientific perspective and realize that humanity can contribute to climate change and that we can take actions to mitigate our effect. We may not avoid some of the extreme weather that's going to come, but we can prevent it from getting much worse and possibly avoid human extinction. Now, there's some religious perspective. Abe talks about this on his blog, that climate change isn't real. It's actually God making things bad because we're heading toward the end times or tribulation, and therefore there's nothing we can do about it. from a secular perspective, that's not true. We can take actions, and they might be very big actions that we have to take to mitigate climate change, but it is still within our reach. And other thought, I work in logistics, and under COVID, I'm sure most of you know there are major supply chain disruptions, basically due to worker availability, factory shutdowns, and a lot of companies rely on the just-in-time manufacturing method, which is basically you only keep a minimal amount of supplies necessary to build your product, and you try to get the new stuff in as quickly as possible. That's very difficult in under the best of circumstances. But when you add extreme weather or pandemics related to global warming and shutdowns and transportation disruptions, you can have major supply chain disruptions. In fact, a lot of the ports on the West Coast are backed up with container ships, from my understanding. So, yep, this is a taste of things to come unless we take action. And let's see. Well, I think my final thought is, unfortunately, COVID's shown that in the United States, we're very divided, and as well as other parts of the world. And COVID has exacerbated those divisions. But if we want to have a chance for our species to survive, or at least thrive in the future, we need to find a way to work together. It doesn't mean a totalitarian or one thought, but we need to at least focus on acknowledging that climate change is real and that it needs to be solved. We need to take measures to deal with it. I mean, the debate should be whether it's the Green New Deal or the New Democrats' plan or something else, but it should not be climate change doesn't happen, or climate change is happening. We should be way past that. And so those are my thoughts. Have a great recording, and I'll catch you guys next month.
And that was William Brinkman, contributing as best he can from some distance elsewhere in whatever dimension he's currently inhabiting, because, well, that's kind of what happens with Bolingbroke, I think. I don't know. Interesting point. A couple of people in the chat are suggesting some interesting potential projects to look into. But I have here to admit my ignorance there. I haven't heard of Project Drawdown or Being the Change by Peter Kalmus. I haven't heard of either of those before. Have you, other people who are actually currently live in the chat?
Well.
Okay, I'll take that dead silence as a no, and the type of no one normally sees in a classroom of children who've been asked a dangerous question by the teacher. That certainly looks good, though. Let me see. I'm going to read what the commenter just said. Project Drawdown is a coalition of researchers and professionals that have come up with 100 solutions ranging from tech fixes on AC to educating girls. Well, I'm certainly in favor of that all the way. That is, I discovered, actually a website, drawdown.org. Seems to have, well, it certainly says it's the world's leading resource for climate solutions. I don't know how to compare resources for climate solutions. I don't know for sure if that's true, but at a glance, it looks legit for certain. That's
check it out, probably.
Yeah, and that's sort of the issue we're talking about here. It's not that we are in any way claiming that ignorance is a good place to be discussing these things from, but rather either you're an active expert or at least activist on the topic or not. And kind of what we're looking at the moment is, what's all this for somebody who otherwise has it's a different perspective, a different way to live. It's as if you're not an expert or an activist already. So, I mean, I don't know. It's like, on the one hand, I feel like I am simultaneously the worst person to be talking about this and yet representative of who needs to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah. How do you make social change? It's again gradual movement by people who have at least a partial stake in it. If the only people who talked about transgender right were transgender people, those rights would be wiped away in a moment. It's for up to, allies and people who want to at least help out to stand up and talk about it. And the same thing with climate. We've got to, talk about these issues on a regular basis, keep beating the drum more or less, and keep sort of pushing these narratives. Even, our small little actions do make a bit of difference. And every little bit helps. We need every hand on deck for this one, quite frankly.
Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty much what I think as a blogger, as a micro blogger, as somebody who's like literally only the extent of their community hands in the discourse is commenting on people on Facebook, like whether that's just like ripping on people acting foolish or promoting people that are saying good things, or defending people that are saying good things when they get attacked, as is often the case. Like we're all in the conversation, and unless we're just total lurkers, and that's our part. That's a big part of what we can do. Of course, like voting for like the least worst politicians, like pressuring the politicians that we do have, whether regardless of where they came from, what their positions are, to take into account what's actually happening. We shouldn't have a wildfire season like the one we have now. We shouldn't. This is the current state of the world is completely freaking unacceptable, and we got to like keep reminding them of that whenever they think they can get away with acting like it is like status quo is adequate,
or indeed it all away. Like, I find most conspiracy thinking to be quite baffling, but the ones that are trying to claim, and if you say the people who are saying climate change is a hoax tend to also be saying COVID is a hoax because of crank magnetism, but it's like, I don't understand how somebody can arrive at that sort of point of view. It's a question, it's almost off topic. Well, not quite. A little bit. It's adjacent. It's on the edge of topic. But the question I run through my head when HA was talking earlier was the conspiracy theorists of the government of Alberta, which is currently insane, claiming that climate change isn't really a thing and are just trying to find ways to destroy the industry. What do they think are our motivations for trying to destroy the petrochemical industry, given that they think climate change isn't real? Like, do they think we think it's fun? Like, what's up with that?
Well, I don't think it's
at least a little fun.
A little, yes. I don't think it's sort of advanced that. It's both more advanced and both different and better and all that. I don't think there's a solid active denialist stance that anyone can sort of feasibly take nowadays. There are, I mean, a few holdouts and all that, but I don't think the Alberta government, even other than maybe the sort of the feverish edges and all that, actually even holds to that. What tends to sort of hold within these conservative circles is instead sort of a nihilism or a defeatism that, yeah, it's going to happen, but there's nothing we can do about it. Or alternatively, a tokenism, essentially. Yes, it is a big deal. We're totally looking after it, and then they don't really do much of anything at all. Those tend to be sort of the main two reactions that I see within it. As for why, it's never fully articulated. Like, there was a report, essentially, it's drafted after the election we had here at Provincial, talking which was pledged to sort of look into the international conspiracy sort of driving this sort of thing, and looking at where all these local environmental groups got their funds and blah blah blah. It was hyped up as something fairly massive. Millions of dollars were devoted to it. It was delayed, I think, in total something like a year and a half or
They're
so.
gonna spend money on nothing. I want that money.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars. I want that.
Oh yeah. Overall, I think it was over $3 million. Again, I'm going by memory, so. But I believe we spent over $3 million on that report. There were threats of subpoenas to environmental groups to, get the answers from them on their finances. In the end, essentially the government said, "Oh, the report's been filed. We're gonna call it under executive privilege and not actually release it to the public or anything like that." Which, I mean, a big red flag right there. Wasn't really relevant anyway because somebody immediately leaked it to the press. And it turns out, actually, rather than do any sort of like investigation or anything like that, essentially the author looked at a bunch of websites and said, "Well, I can't find any evidence for a conspiracy. Sorry." What they did find, though...
Nice work if you can get it.
Oh, yeah. $3 million just to Google a couple of things? God, that would be great.
I'm really good at Googling. I could probably get a few more million.
Oh, yeah. Man, my God. But that wasn't the only conclusion it came to, that there was no conspiracy. It came to the conclusion that a lot of these groups were anti-Albertan. That by basically being in favor of fighting climate change, they're opposed to Albertan values and thus an enemy of the Albertan people. Which, yeah, as fascist as it sounds.
Which implies that Alberta is fundamentally anti-environment, and you can't be in Alberta without, or you can't be pro-Alberta without being pro-oil?
Such is what
Do they not remember what the prairies were for previously?
Well, that is really funny. I love that.
Well, not only that, but where was Canada's first national park? Alberta. Like, hello, it's kind of embedded into our DNA, quite frankly. The conservative government here is very much sort of cut from the worst of the Republican governments that are down in the United States. Really, the more you sort of compare us to like Florida or Texas or something like, the more accurate a picture you've got of how our government behaves.
It sounds like the Albertan version of the thing where in the States they're all saying, "Oh, if you study racism, that's anti-American." It's like, you're saying that America is so fundamentally racist that attempting to get rid of racism is anti-American? That's not the win you seem to think it was.
Well, yeah, and I mean, this gets into the whole curriculum revisions that they're pushing through. Essentially, A, they parroted a whole bunch from Wikipedia. B, they never actually consulted any experts on curriculum development, so a lot of it is sort of out of place, where they're sort of asking small kids to study classic Western, like, art. It's like, okay. But not only that,
as a resident of the United States, I'd like to say that when I'm trying to advocate against the big oil, it's specifically because I hate Alberta. I do want to cop to that, just in case anybody thought that there was any other reason for it. I mean, just Alberta sucks so much. Like,
I agree.
I have to smash.
Oh my God, it's the anti-Albertan flavor in this thing. It's driving me nuts. My goodness.
Hey, I'm in Canada's California. Of course, we're not fans of Canada's Texas.
Yeah, I believe it, but we got mountains. Come on, the mountains are nice. Have you ever been to the Badlands?
Yes, we know the mountains are there. We keep you safely on the other side of them.
Which actually is true. For trivia fans, in fact, the Alberta-BC boundary is defined by the Continental Divide, which is sort of the spot where basically water goes into one ocean versus the other. We are literally defined, our border is literally defined by the mountains until you hit a certain point. But yeah.
No, it's one of the commenters just said Alberta is Canada's Florida. No, it is Canada's Texas. Definitely Canada's Texas. I don't think we have a Florida yet. I'm worried about I'm occasionally worried New Brunswick might try it, but we don't have a Florida yet. It's not bonk. It's not. No.
Yeah.
we don't have. I mean, if nothing else, just think of the similarities are at the culture level. It's like Alberta is where we keep the oil and the cowboy hats and the really intense versions of the arrogance. It's very Texas.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now we're getting very, very off topic. So I just want to bring back a little bit and mention that the other, the book that the chat is talking about, that sounds like it's a very practical thing. I think I might look into this one. Being the Change by Peter Kalmus. It says that Peter is a climate modeler from the Jet Propulsion Labs, which I didn't know any of that before this. I'm just reading what they're telling us there. It says a book about how he cut his emissions 1/10 of the average, I presume the American average, while living within Los Angeles car culture. It sounds like there'd probably be a lot of very practical things in there. No, we don't have a DeSantis.
That's living the change. You said being the change a couple of times. It's Living the Change by Peter. At least in the one side of the chat that I'm looking at.
Yes, I mean, I found the name there.
I don't know. I'd argue Jason Kinney is a bit like a DeSantis.
It's Being the Change. I looked that up. It's
I guess it's wrong on the side that I'm looking at. That's all right. Yeah. Hey,
either way, if you can find books about being, living, or otherwise existing the change by Peter Kalmus, it'll probably work.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. I had a half an ambition to kind of go on a rant during the course of our thing here, about kind of indulging in that despair for at least a minute, because this subject is very, very bothersome, disturbing, upsetting, terrible for me, and just get something off my chest in that respect. But are we trying to keep these to about an hour, or are we okay with going
yes,
a little over that?
We're closing in towards the end right now. I was just getting ready to find a place, and now you've created the place. I was going to say we're closing in on the end, so maybe it's time for a few final remarks. I will say only, I think it's appropriate to express concerns. I'd like to try to keep the defeatism away, at least as far as we can manage. So judge yourself accordingly. Just judge yourself accordingly. How about some closing remarks then? Rant if you wish, Satan.
There's definitely I'm going to indulge in a little ableist language here for a moment. There's a tendency as a person that's on the sort of atheist, rationalist, skeptical side of things to think of yourself as kind of the lone sane man in a world gone mad kind of thing, right? But I think particularly environmental scientists have had to have this feeling for a pretty long time. They could see a lot of this coming, and they could see it happening within their own lifetimes back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They could see deforestation, mass extinctions of animals, ocean acidification rising. They felt bad about it. They felt like nobody's paying attention. They're just watching literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of species, might be in the thousands, just vanishing constantly. Somebody was saying that being an environmentalist is now is or a naturalist right now is being an art historian in a world where art museums are being burned at the rate of one a year at least. It's and as somebody that was one of my first awarenesses of the larger world outside of myself was reading books about animals and being wow, look at all these beautiful and interesting animals in the world, and they're dropping like flies, and there's going to be no stop to that. We're going to see the natural world denuded to a level that's going to be comparable to the one of the major extinctions of the past, the extinction of the great dinosaurs, or the KT extinction event, or even worse, the one before that, where it's 90% of the life on the planet, the species on the planet, went extinct, and it was just one species, one crappy species called Lystrosaurus that was took over the world. Now humans have abilities that no other animal in the history of the natural history of the planet has had. If it was possible for the human species to be Lystrosaurus and be the only thing left standing, that might happen. we could see a world where there's just no fucking natural world left except for like, like human beings and then our artificial creations, like, algae vats and stuff like that. It's things could get incredibly grim and disgusting. It didn't have to be like this. I am so unbelievably mad that that the bastards in charge of things aren't taking this more seriously, getting stuff done now. The idea that, like, Brinkman was saying, it's ridiculous that we even have the debate about whether or not this is real. At this point, for me, it's ridiculous that we're even having the freaking debate about whether or not we need to throw the whole entire freaking brick wall at it right now, get on it right now, like the Green New Deal bare minimum. The idea that the Green New Deal is seen as too radical is just like all the more indication that we're going to go straight into the ground with like horrible extinction events, the natural world just completely destroyed. This could be extremely ugly, and I hate it. And it's I don't think that anybody who's living in North America has any reason to be like panicking, talking about mercy killing your children, any of that kind of stuff. But I do think that this is going to look incredibly ugly. It's going to be so much worse than it needs to be. And I'm bitterly angry about that whenever I think about it for even a fucking minute. So that's about where things are at for me.
At this rate, we're going to end up eating the rich because there's not going to be anything else left to eat.
At least they are quite nourishing. Certainly,
Good
they
idea.
keep themselves in good shape.
Generally fairly fatty. The meat should fall off the bone and slow cook them. Okay, this has gone in a weird place. Any closing remarks, HJ?
Oh, wow. I mean, a lot of sort of what we're talking about with defeatism and all that within the climate thing, it sort of parallels what we've got with other activist movements as well. How do you deal with the despair of being a feminist in a profoundly anti-feminist world? How do you deal with the despair of being an anti-racist in a profoundly racist world? Well, you take it in slow bits. You work on what you can. You take frequent breaks in order to sort of fulfill your own personal needs. But in the end, you try and wear things down gradually over time. It's the evolutionary approach to activism, more or less. And, I mean, it works, obviously. It has worked in the past. It will continue to work in the future. So try and stay away from despair, even as you do try and keep a realistic judgment of what's going to happen. I mean, people will die due to climate change. Don't forget that. But also don't forget to post your silly memes to help spread the word, to get more people to action. And hey, maybe you should actually think about contributing to a political party this year, or, donating some funds to a conservation group or environmental group or something like that. Or hey, if you're in the neighborhood where some climate action is taking place, why not maybe, hop in and see what you can do. See what you can do, see the small changes you can make to step up. Again, sort of, both keeping humble in that the amount of changes that you can do, given that you're just a small player on this, in a greater cog in the system. While also just trying to, push things forward a little bit. Try and find that balance between, activism and living your life. Yeah, I guess that's about it.
Sounds like pretty good practical advice. And perhaps that book might have some direct advice for it too. And with that, we've reached the end of our time. So those of you who joined us today, thank you very much. Those of you who might be coming in later, I hope you found something at least interesting to listen to in this talk amongst unexperts on the topic. Thank you all, and goodbye.